much for your patience, guys. Hello and welcome to the PiG Daily, episode number 67. Defending Terran one base all-ins as Protoss. I was like, defending PvT something something. I don't know why. As soon as I'm introducing the show, I stumble over my words. Today we're talking about defending all those nasty, disgusting one base all-ins, the new equivalent of the 111 that we remember from the days of Wings of Liberty and even HOTS a little bit, where basically the Terran gets a mixture of Marines, tanks, it used to be Banshees, but nowadays it's like Liberators, tanks, sometimes Cyclones are mixed in. It's a disgustingly powerful and awesome play. I've done a few VODs on...
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to turn that off right now, right before everything gets interrupted. I forgot something. There we go. Thank you very much for the host, but there we go. Okay, so let's dive on in. Let's take a look at some games. So this is something which has just been destroying players in Korea. There is literally zero VODs of people defending these sort of rushes in Korea. Right now, we see here Maru versus Classic. He's opened up with like a Cyclone, some Marines, and then tanks and Liberators are going to be joining the fray and building bunkers as well. Because if you don't build the bunkers, well, the Protoss can kind of bide their time, wait for an Immortal or two to come out, and then just casually engage. But the bunkers kind of say, you have to fight me right now. If those bunkers finish, you will lose. And we see here, Classic, he's got some pretty impressive micro, but not quite good enough. And over the course of the next few minutes, gets pushed in, more tanks, more bunkers, more libs, more Marines, does end up going down. Big shout out to Esports TV. Of course, Esports TV and Kesper for these ones from Kesper Cup. This is game 3 of that series after Maru tried to play a macro game in game 2 on cross-map Frost. Didn't go too well for him. Classic's defense was spectacular. Took no damage from the early pressures. And once again, we do see multiple Cyclones and actually Mag Field upgrade on the way this time. Cyclone's very good for dealing with Oracles, of course. And he actually opens up otherwise with a Marine Mine Drop. So it looks like a pretty standard pressure build, but there's no command center behind this at all. And there will be eventually like tanks and stuff coming behind this, I think, as well. Does he go tanks or does he just keep rallying Cyclones with this? He might just keep rallying Cyclones because there's Phoenix out. But essentially, yet another example of one of these very technical pushes where it's so hard to get the Stalkers to deal with the Liberators and the detection to deal with the mines, and the units to deal with, the Cyclones as well. So it's really tough, and a lot of these Protoss players do die. This one went on for like another 10 minutes, and then he eventually loses. He's on one base forever. Maru doesn't even expand because he's Maru, but he gets there. So I'm just kind of showing you guys a montage of Koreans getting wrecked by this. Here we see TY versus Trap from Kesper Cup. Yet another very recent game, where in this case, actually, it was really cute what he did in this game. I'm going to go back a bit and show you. Check out that. So there's this cool thing TY always does where he alternates between super aggressive and super all-in play on this map especially, and he always puts his first depot down here. So the probe has to go all the way around to scout. And because a lot of players, like we saw Zest, for instance, he likes to scout only after his Nexus goes down, like super greedy. And as a result, like he'd get really surprised by the time the probe gets over here. There's like a Marine out and he sees nothing. He doesn't realize it's either a 3 command center build or it's a 1 base all in. So TY had the same idea with this build, but Trap actually scouted it really early. Sees exactly what's going on. He's like, oh, you're going to do a really fast all in. Fast forward to a couple minutes later when it's pushing. And he just kind of gets killed. And this is something where there's so many games like this in Korea, and I do think it's a little bit comical because it's a little bit sad as well that players have been getting wrecked by it, but a lot of players are like, well, look, it keeps working so much, therefore it must be unbeatable. I don't think so. I do feel like it's very hard to stop. I think, a lot of people have been talking about this style, especially after I mentioned I was trying to find VODs of the Protoss winning to do a show, and a lot of people were chiming in on Twitter. Drogo was saying, I think with good execution, 3-gate Robo, Protoss can always defend Artosis, and Canning were like, I don't know, I feel like it's a lot harder than that. Like in Korean leagues, we really haven't seen any, consistent response at high level. Players just keep on dying to this over and over again. And, and they were like saying, I really feel like it's the complexity of exactly what type of timing. Are they going to be mass cyclones? Is it one cyclone into into tanks, how many liberators are there, do they open up with a mine drop, figuring out exactly what's going to hit you at first and kind of taking it from there. So this one gets out of control as well. So let's turn that off. I gave you guys a montage of Protoss dying to give you a bit of context in terms of exactly what the issue is and what's been going on. It was interesting to give you guys a little bit of context. You know what? Let's dive straight into a game. Actually, before I talk about the whole how do you adapt, exactly which version of PvT is it? I've got so many different things to talk about and show you guys in regards to this topic. So let's hop in game here. Now this is an older game. And it's also a slightly older version of the push, but it's nonetheless a very good example. Now this is Drogo against Massacre from IEM Shanghai, round of 16. Massacre did end up winning this series 3-1, but this is the one game Drogo won in pretty convincing fashion. So his probe comes in. Now notice what he's seeing. He's seeing both gas geysers. So he knows it's some sort of really one base heavy play. Whenever you recognize that there's two gas down, before any command center or factory or anything's going down, like there is no option for them to take a command center until quite late. And what we want to talk about is the most important tenets of your standard defense. Even if you don't know exactly what type it is, let's just talk about the generic defense. And this is going to be the most important thing for you guys who are newer players. I do want to mention, some of you guys might remember, hey, PiG, haven't you talked about this video before? Yes, I previously talked about 3-gate robo as a build order. And I talked about it specifically as something which was very safe at shutting down any sort of aggressive gas-first play. My knowledge was a little bit simpler about TVP, but it is essentially the best defensive build. But it's also something which I was talking about how it's so good because you can then get a warp prism out, go across the map, and you can kill your opponent potentially, or put a lot of pressure on while macroing behind that, but maintaining a lot of pressure and a lot of threat. And I was like, this is a really cool way to play. But so yeah, so that was something I did already talk about this replay, just in terms of, hey, and if you happen to be doing this build, it's awesome at shutting down all-ins as well. But I didn't really go through the finer details of the little adjustments you make once you see that second gas. I was like, well, 3-gate robo is good. You build units, you build an Immortal or a Warp Prism, and then you're good to go. But it's not as simple as that. What you'll notice here in this game, and this is something I've noticed against all the successful Protoss holds, of the very few that I did actually find against high-level players, was there's no mothership core. What Protoss players have realized is against these one-base pushes, the Terran is always going to be using things like cyclones, things like tanks which outrange pylons. As a result, pylons really only function as something which can give you time. They buy you a little bit of time. But considering what I was talking about before, remember, we were looking at that VOD and I was saying the Terran wants to build bunkers because the bunkers say, I don't care how much time you want to buy, you need to engage before these bunkers get up or it's going to be impossible to break. Like, the Protoss does not have a choice there. The Protoss always needs to try and break it before those bunkers get up. So as a result, the mothership core becomes not that important because by the time you've bought time with, say, 1 photon overcharge, there's bunkers finished and you're like, well, I lose the game now unless I somehow shade past him with Adepts and I try to drop with a Prism and I'm probably going to lose because they're sieging my natural already. So let's talk about this response in terms of all those things. So putting this back on Drogo's vision. Don't want to watch the fight just yet. Oh, I guess you guys can watch the fight while I make sure I've got my notes organized here. Where'd it go? Where did my notes go on that? Okay. Here we go. So whenever you recognize any sort of double gas play, very aggressive one base play, like Drogo did here, and notice he crushed that pretty hard, that was pretty sick. So the first thing I mentioned was the mothership core gets skipped. So he scouted double gas at this point. What does Drogo do? Number one, continue your build as normal. Get the core, get the second gas, get a second pylon, standard stuff, nothing too crazy there. But notice, skips the mothership core, just chrono boosts out an Adept. Now he really wants to confirm with this Adept exactly what's going on. Is there a factory swapping onto the reactor? The Adept is very important because it's going to give you some more information about exactly what's going on. He's going to see, in this case, a fast reactor, and he's going to know, okay, there's a bunch of Marines. That means the factory and the starport are further back, and they're going to have to swap add-ons with each other. So that just gives him a little bit of information about exactly what's going to be going on. And behind that, you want to go for a very fast robotics. It's super important to do this because against an all-in Cyclone Rush, you need to get a Warp Prism out very quickly. Against a tank push, you need to get out an Immortal very quickly, an Immortal or two. Against yeah, I mean, those are the two main sorts that can come your way. So you need to figure out exactly what's going on. So chrono boosting out an Observer very quickly is very important. But even before this, notice how the chrono boost is also very interesting. So also before that, from when your natural nexus finishes, you want to be chrono boosting your warp gate research and your gateway non-stop, and you want to be constantly building units out of this gateway. Stalkers are usually the most general purpose unit because you're going to need them to fight Liberators, you're going to need them to fight Cyclones, and they're not too bad against Siege Tanks and Marines either. They're a good general unit you're always going to need in there because there's always a chance a Liberator rocks up. Usually your first 5 or 6 units consist of mostly Stalkers with just 1 or 2 Adepts or Zealots mixed in. So let's watch this robotics. We're going to see an Observer, and notice he does chrono boost that Observer because, like I said, he needs to see exactly what's coming so he can make any adjustments that are needed. And this is also something which is very interesting. Pylons. Pylon in the mineral line, pylon at the front of the natural. So after watching this replay, and I saw this happen in a few other Protoss games as well, this is the Protoss really respecting the options that can come their way. Because you are a little bit worried about certain things, say your opponent, off this build, they could technically go for the build where he just rocks up with 8 Marines or 6 Marines in a Widowmine, runs into your main base. In which case, you need to not only just pull up your Mothership Core, but you need to pull up all of these gateway units as well. Because that can be hitting any second now. It can be hitting at like 350, thereabouts. So you've got to get in your main base, but they could also then run by with 2 Hellions into the natural, and you're not going to have units to stop it. So having this double pylon coverage will allow your gateway units to defend the main, and your Mothership Core to come down and defend your natural from any sort of Hellion run by. We're not going to get to see that in this game, but this is just a really clever pylon placement here that Drogo shows, and he's really just taking into account every single potential option. I mean, the only thing he's kind of weak to is he doesn't have a pylon behind his mineral line to stop a Liberator, but that's fine. He's got an Observer, he'll see anything like that coming, and he should be able to respond with Stalkers. So notice he's only built the Mothership Core there after starting the extra gateways as well. It's very important to start your 2 extra gateways on time. Normally 3 minutes is the sort of benchmark for saying, oh, if I don't have those gateways down, I need to have them down within about 10-15 seconds at the latest. And I'm sure we'll see Drogo pop these down in just a moment's time. He's actually dropping them slightly later than most players will, but there we go. Like I said, about 3 minutes 10, 3 minutes 15 is the latest you want those. It's kind of okay for him because he's been non-stop chrono boosting units out of this, so he's already got 2 Stalkers and an Adept, which is going to provide the basis of his defense. Now, notice his probe here, also checking for proxies, making sure there's no starport down here. If there is, he'll see exactly what's happening. His Adept is shading out to see when the attack comes, and his Observer's going out front. Now, he's gone straight into Immortal. After speaking to a bunch of Protoss players, I was like, do you go Immortal straight away? What if there's Cyclones? Most Protoss players have the feeling that just by microing Stalkers back and forwards, you can buy enough time with Overcharge and Stalkers, even if they're doing the like 1-base Cyclone all-in, where there's like just lock-on Cyclones dancing around and then Widow Mines and Barracks floating to give vision. They feel like 1 Immortal is like this just necessary thing because it's so good against the tank pushes, and the tank pushes are the more common thing in the current meta. They're more scary, and they always feel like, well, you know, if you see it's multiple Cyclones after this point, you could always change it up and get a Warp Prism after that 1 Immortal, and that's a fine adjustment to make. So that's actually completely legitimate. And here's where you need to be really patient as the Protoss player, and you need to recognize your window. You cannot engage when they arrive straight away. The important reason for this, and this Mothership Core, notice, pops out just in time to buy time. The important reason, so check this out, it's going to have to overcharge immediately. Oh, no, Massacre's not really poking to force the overcharge. There we go, overcharge. The reason is the gateways weren't finished. They're only just finishing now, and this first warp-in is so important. Keep in mind, There is already one Stalker warping in. That gateway was already finished. And an Immortal about to pop. So there's this real period of strength right after that first warp in. We see those 2 Stalkers warping in now. This is usually when your strong point is. Even if they're not setting up bunkers yet, you want to kind of get out there so you can catch the units before they're all pre-spread and sieged up. You want to try and engage and get position out here as much as possible.
I'm here in the shadow.
So these Stalkers, this Adept, the Mothership Corps, and oh my god, he's pulling cakes with him, man. He's pulling probes as well. And this just makes perfect sense. You're up against a 1-base opponent. Even if you lose every probe here, as long as you kill all his army, you can still just rebuild your probes and be in an okay scenario. Notice, though, also, these bunkers were super early, and they're both like halfway done when he pulls probes and goes to engage. He literally could not wait a second later, or these bunkers would be finished. And we talked about what that means. If those bunkers finish, you're pretty screwed. So he's going to come forward here, even though the Immortal's only just popped out and it's going to be late to the fight because he knows his timing. The moment that first warp in finishes, remember he was chrono boosting his warp gate research a little bit. He got those 2 gateways, 3 minutes 15 at the absolute latest. If you can get them a little bit earlier, that's better. And let's look at the micro here. So Drogo's going to come forward. Now against high level players, you always want to focus on the medevacs first, then the tanks, then the cyclones, because that's just the order of the amount of damage they put out. You might be thinking a medevac doesn't put out damage. The problem is Stalkers shoot projectiles. So if you shoot the siege tank, the medevac's usually going to pick it up, and that's going to waste a lot of your Stalker shots. So you'll notice here, let me see actually. Ooh, I think Drogo had one of his units with an attack command for a second there. No, the siege tank is queued up to hit the Stalkers, but the siege, yeah. So these Stalkers, let's go on normal speed. They're going to focus the medevac immediately to take away the micro ability. Because if you don't just shoot the medevac, you're going to shoot a volley at the tank, the medevac's going to pick it up, and that volley hits nothing. It just hits the ground where the tank was, the medevac shoots it, and then you start focusing the medevac, you've essentially wasted a whole volley of shots. And this is something I always see myself doing when I panic in these rushes, but I never see pro gamers do. They always go for that medevac, so you've got to focus that down as quickly as possible. Probes come on in. Now that there's no medevacs alive, the tank gets focused down. And this is like the cleanest hold ever. And he crushes it. I don't think this was the hardest push to stop from Massa. Like I said, this is a bit of an older build. It was one of those things where if Drogo, like Drogo just crushed this so hard, but if Drogo came in 10 seconds later, like those bunkers finish, if that medevac lifts the tank and moves it back a bit earlier, suddenly this could look very different. You know, Massa there loses 2 Marines to overcharge, which he really cannot afford this sort of thing. He wastes his boost there, which is really bad. There was no reason for him to boost his medevac, so a bit of miscontrol here from Massa, and that's what causes this to go so badly. And you can see it, those bunkers were so close to finishing. But a really good defense by Drogo. And that shows us the essential, this is how you 3-gate robo, this is how you defend a generic assault after you've spotted 2 gases and you know they're kind of doing some crazy all-in type aggression. So this was an old replay, so I'm going to have to relog into StarCraft. I've got a much more current replay. I've actually got a Beyond replay we're going to be looking at next, so I'm going to load that one up. And we can start to talk about recognizing exactly what type of rush it is and trying to deal with that entire problem of how do you recognize exactly what type of rush it is? How do you kind of balance out the exact number of units, the type of units? How fast do you get your prism to cancel out cyclones by using your lift micro? There's a lot of questions involved. So I'm going to go through this replay and we're going to talk about a few of those different options. So awesome. Current patch replay. Oh my God. So rare that I get to look at current replays. Don't have to log on out to load them up. Kapira says, Pig, what about the Marine Widowmine drop with the double Liberator in the main? He would have scouted that with him as the Observer. The Observer's going to always check for that. And then he would have, if you see that your opponent's like coming with some Liberators and stuff after that medevac in the mine's like, well, you're just going to drop an extra pylon in the back of your mineral line so your overcharge can help defend there. But generally speaking, having your units in position, keep building those units, you should be able to just defend it. There's nothing unstoppable about those pushes unless you're very unaware of which angle they're coming from. and you know, they don't have a lot of firepower with that. I've actually never seen that at pro level. So I you know, 6 Marines don't actually have a lot of damage output if someone does that. Even if you've got to evacuate a mineral line for a little while, like they're not going to kill anything very quickly because Liberators can't shoot buildings and neither can Widow Mines, so it's not the biggest deal. So let us now look at this game. Harstem versus Beyond. This is from the... Crap, I really should have written down the name. It's a Chinese name. They played in a Chinese tournament. I can't remember what the name is. I apologize. I'm not going to try and say it because I'll sound like super ignorant if I try to pronounce it just off memory. All right, so in this game, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different options. And before we do that, actually, let's pause this replay. I'm going to show you guys the, oops, so this is my, this is my desktop. Here you guys go. So like I said, I tweeted, let's make this nice and big for you guys to read. About today's daily, I was like, I'm trying to plan a daily on holding one base TVP pushes as Protoss. Any suggestions? You know, Artosis mentioned Trust had a solid hold, which was the game where Innovation did the one base Cyclone Mine Cheese. You know, I did a daily on how to do that cheese. It was number 50. Pretty disgusting one, but you know, Innovation did make a little bit of a mistake. Both players kind of did in that game, and it was a very specific, different type. We might, if we've got time, we'll look at that at the end of today's show. You know, and Artis was saying, I'm not sure you'll find a victory from Protoss at pro level where the Terran doesn't screw up other than that. None come to mind. M. Canning chimed in. He was like, you know, I'm really starting to hate facing this build more than the old 1-1. And I was like, I tweeted this because I kept looking for VODs and I kept finding VODs of Maru and TY winning, which is why I got to show you guys that beautiful montage at the start of Protoss just dying. There's a lot of rock, paper, scissors stuff in terms of how to defend early on, Artosis said. And Drogo came and he was like, I disagree. Drogo's always the guy who's borderline stubborn, but has a lot of knowledge about the game and is very confident in his own understanding of it. Even if he makes a mistake and screws something up 3 times in a row, he'll still be confident that he knows what mistakes he's made and exactly how to fix them. So I always value Drogo's judgment and how he assesses things. And he says, look, if you scout it, 3-gate robo, properly executed, should hold everything. And basically, as we go on, Artosis and M. Canning just kind of kept saying, and I'm gonna link this for you guys in chat. I'll link it on this Twitter chain on annotation as well if you're on YouTube. But basically, they came down to the point that you can't tell if it's going to be cyclones, bunkers, tanks, or something else. And you can't tell exactly what the combination is going to be. I touched on this earlier in the show. So how do you respond? You know, it's very difficult because you need that prism really early against the cyclone rushes like what Innovation did. And we'll talk about that rush a bit later. You need to get those immortals out against the tanks. You can't let the bunkers get up. If the bunkers ever get up and you miss your timing to engage, you just get screwed. And there's so many different options and so on. So let's try and narrow that down now, but while we look at this game of Harstem. So let's dive back into this game, keeping in mind my goal in the next few minutes is to talk about, well, let's try and identify exactly what's going. We already talked about a very generic structure. This is on Harstem's camera, so I apologize for the spam there. So yeah, basically it's like we can analyze now, trying to think, okay, we looked at a very generic response from Drogo. It was perfect for the situation. It worked out great. But let's talk a little bit about scouting and understanding exactly what's going on and really having a sort of tree in your mind of what are the options that they could be going for. And realistically, there's 3 things which I believe are the most important. And let me just... Yeah. So there's three main things. Sorry guys, just getting my notes in order. Got 50 tabs going at once. So the first one, so with the gas first, right? The first thing they could do is get a Reaper and a factory out. They can still get a command center at their natural at 1 minute 45, which is a very normal timing to get that command center. The only difference is they've got a nice early Reaper to scout with while having a faster factory than normal. And a slightly worse mineral economy than someone who just did, say, a barracks gas. Whoops. Yeah, and that's like a very generic opening. The thing is, you can sometimes rule that out. So let's go back a little bit to where Harstam starts to rule things out. So he comes back up with his probe. He'd already scouted the gas first. Doesn't know if there's a second gas. Comes back to scout again. And he goes, what? Why are you trying to block me? Why is there a second depot here? And hey, it's 1 minute 45 and there's no command center. He's not going to be hiding the command center back there. It's too inefficient. Pro gamer wouldn't do that. So he immediately says, well, you've probably gone double gas. This probably isn't the option. So already we can rule out, if you check their natural at 1 minute 45, you can say it's probably not a gas first economic opening, especially if there's a second depot here. Otherwise, he would be able to get in with this probe and double check, is there a second gas? What's going on? If there's ever the second depot, you can just play it safe, assume that they're doing some sort of crazy 2-gas play. So past that point, what are the other options? One is you can go gas first, Marines out of that barracks, and then you can build a factory in base. But you will see the factory with that. The reason is if we check our timings, let's go off Harstam's camera, is if you look at the way the money lines up for Beyond's build, he's got 100 gas before the barracks finishes. So the probe is still in here. So keep in mind, that gas has to go somewhere. As this barracks finishes, the Terran player needs to think, if I build a Reaper, then I got to go for the command center. I'm going for that option we already talked about. Harstam can rule that out by checking the natural. The other option is a factory. Why is the factory not down? The factory should already be started. In fact, he's building it on the other side of the map. And that's the third option, is proxy factory. So there's really only these 3 options off gas first. Either they take that fast expansion off it, or they're building a factory. You either see the factory at home, or the factory is proxied somewhere. Harstam's recognized this, especially that second depot, tipping him off that there's probably some sort of 1-base all-in. And look at this probe. He's given an attack move command. It's scouting everywhere for those common proxy locations. He was going to check up there, but he's decided, you know what, I'm going to check over here first, and then check up there. And this is just smart scouting from Harstam. This is him being intelligent, reacting to what's going on, and already he suddenly is in this great position because he's like, well, I'm going to see exactly what you're doing with this factory. I know what's going on. And just actually having that in your mind is so important. And this is something which a lot of players really don't focus on enough, even at high level sometimes, is realistically, what are your opponent's options? A lot of people play within the meta and they're like, oh, if I see gas first, they always proxy a factory and then they land in my base and build Widow Mines there. But realistically, just because that's popular right then, is that really the whole kind of spectrum of options? Even here, I'm mentioning 3 options. Technically, there's other things outside of that can exist, but you do want to kind of understand the full array of current builds that are possible off that opening so that you can very easily scout them. You say, it's not this, it must be this. Easy peasy. And that's exactly what Harstam did here in this game. So, let's put this on Harstam's view. So already we've figured out how to figure out exactly kind of what sort of rush it is in that regard. And that doesn't tell you if it's going to be Cyclones or tanks just yet. However, if it's a proxy factory, well, you can relatively easily keep an eye on what's going on. Simply by scouting with that probe, Harstam saw, hey, you're building off it without a tech lab. That means I know you're going to open up with a very fast Widow Mine. I need to get that observer out very quickly. And notice the same thing as Drogo did, no mothership core. Very intelligent reaction there. I'm not sure if he'll do the double pylon in the natural. Let's check that. And we see here, remember, 3 minutes 10, 3 minutes 15. That's the latest you want to be getting those gateways down. Chrono boosting the warp gate. Getting an observer straight away. Interestingly, he actually does freeze up on his gateway production after just 1 Stalker and 1 Adept, whereas Drogo was like, I need to get that third Stalker out, the second Stalker, the third gateway unit immediately. And Drogo delayed his gateways by a few seconds to get that to happen. The mothership core does start just now, and we are going to see Harstam. I'm pretty sure he's going to put pylons down here in the natural. Because remember, right around this 4-minute mark, this is when the attacks can start hitting you. So you need to have your pylon ready and finished at that moment in order to help buy time. So, Harstam, where did he put his third pylon down? Oh, he actually built a proxy counter pylon. And he completed his triangle in his main base as well. So this is interesting. Remember, Drogo skipped that pylon, but Harstam's saying, this way I can defend my main mineral line entirely just with overcharge. Or at least I'll be able to choose the best pylon to overcharge. And only now dropping that pylon at the natural. His observer, he also used to clear up that Widow Mine. And he's now going to check with it exactly what's going on, or he should. Oh no, his probe actually spotted what's going on anyway. Okay, cool. Oh yeah. From here, notice those gateways are turning into warp gates. They're going to not constantly build units. Super important. Overcharge is just to buy time. Notice he doesn't use it straight away because it was just a few Marines, but then once the tank arrives, he has to use it. So you don't want to get your overcharge baited out because you've only got one until you absolutely actually need to use it. And you want to immediately start dropping extra pylons. 57 out of 70 doesn't seem that bad. Seems like you could build a bunch of units, but remember the pylons are always going to be the first thing to die at the front. So you've got to be very careful with how you engage. Now, because he only built 2 units, notice he's only got 5 gateway units come this moment where he has to engage the push. Drogo, on the other hand, was a little bit more efficient at getting out 3 gateway units, so he had a few more. Also, Harstem a little bit slow on his probe pool here. However, it is still that same structure as we saw Drogo do, where right after your first warp in of units, you always want to grab all your probes, rush out there, and clear this area. And it's not just so they can't get bunkers up, it's also just so they can stop wailing on your pylons and hitting your units for free. If you don't get out there now, suddenly 8 Marines and a tank in 30 seconds is going to be 2 tanks, a Liberator, a mine, and 12 Marines. And that's where like the Terran position can really get out of control. So we see there Harstem with a very smart move out and then pulls his probes back because he knows he can't, chase down a tank evac, of course. And he's got to try and maintain this position as much as possible. Now, Harstem does actually make a little bit of a mistake here. See, this is really good. Goes out there, tries to snipe down that medevac, but loses this position there because he stayed a little bit too long. Staying to fight that tank, he obviously got baited by the weak medevac and then was like, well, the medevac has to pull back, let's get the tank. Ends up getting neither, and suddenly is like, oh crap. Ah, crap, I can't fight out here anymore. And this allows Beyond to kind of move forward a little bit. However, we've got an Immortal coming out as well. And then he gets really wrecked there, trying to engage once again piecemeal. You can see here Harstem is so aware of how dangerous this area outside his base is. He knows he needs to engage there, but he's getting too overeager. So you've got to balance the fact that you can't let Terran siege up in this like abusive, powerful position, but at the same time, you've only got to engage into it. Like if you don't have the units, sometimes you do just need to let the Terran siege up, wait for a few more units, stay back so you're not bleeding out units, and then engage into them. Something else which we're going to see here, which is really awesome, is he's out of money. He's really low on cash, so he actually starts warping in Zealots because they're still going to tank a lot of damage as long as you spread your units out to minimize tank splash. And the Zealots are still going to do a lot of damage once they get into range of these units. And that's going to allow him to build more Immortals, more Stalkers. Notice he's still got this Immortal up on full life with a barrier ready. He's got another Immortal about to pop. He's just trying to buy time here because he bled out a lot of units before. But it's okay to hang on here. If you ever get in a desperate situation, because it's 39 probes versus 26, he's got those gateways building. He's added in a 4th gateway. You always want to add in extra gateways if you miss macro or if you start floating minerals, which will naturally happen. And then you wait for your moment to engage with everything at once. And as that Nexus starts taking more damage, as he gets a few more units warped in, it is going to be time. I think he's got to go right now. Yeah. So he's going to pull the probes once more. He's going to engage on into that. The Stalkers have to focus the Liberators. But unfortunately, you can see all of his Stalkers are getting wrecked. Luckily, he has this one Stalker down here, which is staying out of the Liberation Zone. And his other units just plow right on through and manage to overwhelm. He lost 17 probes, so it's kind of bad. But he's got the Nexus up. He rebuilds those probes. He does end up winning the game from here. He takes advantage of the fact that he killed every important tech unit and immediately chases down Bjorn and starts doing some very important damage here. So, Bjorn tries to slow down the counter push, but Harstem, very smart, goes and drops Immortals on top of those tanks. Gets both of the tanks, forces the factory to lift. He knows, hey, there's no factory at home, and he uses the Warp Prism as well to start counter pushing. Now, guys, one thing I didn't mention early on in that response is that gateway timing. A lot of you might be constantly building probes. You might be like, man, I just can't get my gateway started on time. Maybe I'm not quite as good at macro as Harstem and Drogo. I'm pretty sure, I forgot to actually identify the specific points, but there will always be points against these sort of rushes where once a Protoss identifies that the opponent is going for these super heavy committed, 2 gas plays, there will always be a moment where the Protoss player cuts probes for just a moment to make sure those, those gateways get down on time, to make sure that Robo and those, Observer and then Immortal gets out on time. It's so important to do that. Harstem just keeps pressuring and keeping him on one base while building lots of probes at home. He's going to wreck this Liberator harassment back here. Oh, or is he? Yes, he is. He's going to focus down the Stim here with a double Zealot Warp in and an Immortal, which is pretty brutal. There's like this desperate one-base Marine push here, and Stim's being cancelled, so it's just like a bunch of Marines, a Liberator, and a Medevac, and obviously the Stalker Sentry with the overcharge is more than enough. Harstem's got 2 bases, and it is GG. So let's quickly go back, try and identify a point. Let's see if there was one where there were probes cut. So the way you can identify this is if you watch the production tab, up here in the top right, we're watching to see if there's any moment where it's not 2 probes producing. So you might have to cut probes to get those gateways down. And it's completely fine to do that if you have to. I think it's probably really important. We see there just 1 probe, so he does cut a bit of probe production here. That then resumes 2 probes. I personally think there's a small error here. I think Harstem, knowing that he's up against a proxy factory, knows it's a heavily committed play. I think he should have cut 2 extra probes a little bit earlier in order to keep his gateway producing that 3rd unit. What we saw Drogo do in the first game was cut probe production just slightly more, and he got that 3rd gateway unit out. And even just 1 extra gateway unit, I really think helps you with that first, holding of the first wave. I'm sure Harstem might disagree with me. Maybe does, maybe doesn't. But I personally think being 2 probes down is not that big. Stopping the Terran setup outside your base is the most important thing. It's absolutely vital. All right, guys. So I'm not going to bother going through Trap and Innovation Cyclone Cheese. I already did a video on the Trap Defending Innovation Cyclone Cheese because that's basically just sick micro. I'm just going to kind of show it on the screen because it was bloody incredible how he did it. He just did some sick micro. So I'm going to show that while I answer questions and finish off the show. Today's been a longer one because, like I said, so much information from pro gamers, new replays, new VODs. I only found this morning, even though I already had the show planned. So I had to change up the show, squeeze a lot more information in there. And, Base Trade, thank you so much, mate. Or mates. I actually, man, I'm so bad at talking today. I'm definitely not going offline. But yeah, guys, so let's take a look in-game while I answer a few questions. So like I said, I had to put a lot more information in here. Whoops. Where's the button? There's the button. So this is the Innovation Cyclone Mine Cheese, which is pretty gross. We use the barracks for spotting. And it's all about the Warp Prism, picking up Stalkers to negate the lock-on. So that's something which is very important against these rushes as well. If your opponent builds Cyclones, you usually want to get a Warp Prism in case they do this. Even against 1 Cyclone, a Warp Prism can help a lot. But yeah, guys, so basically I had to squeeze a lot of information in. Hope you guys don't mind the episode going a bit longer than normal. I'm going to scroll through chat and see if there's any really legitimate questions which I may have missed. It looks like Hiju Bufan says you're Aussie or British. I'm Aussie, but when I'm trying to explain things, I try to pretend I'm David Attenborough. So I try to channel my inner British just a little bit, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We see there Trap go for a really YOLO engage, lose all his stuff, and now he's like in so much trouble. This one is actually from Pro League, so shout out to Spo TV, Esports TV, YouTube, where this little highlight is from. And you can see here though, he gets so good at just every time those Cyclones lock on, you're going to see a line from the Cyclone to the Stalker, and then you're going to see the Warp Prism pick up those Stalkers to negate that and just cut that lock on off. Such sick micro there. Something which, if you're playing at a high level and you're playing against these sort of Cyclone cheeses, you really need to get good at doing. Otherwise, you're not going to hold. And he does end up holding this. After a long time, he finally breaks it. Yeah, he kind of gets blink finished, I think. He just like dives on top of the Cyclones, manages to barely overwhelm it, and then he's way ahead. All right, guys. So thank you very much for hanging out. I do really appreciate the support. That's the end of today's show. I hope you found it helpful. I hope I didn't miss any of my important notes. It's such chaos because there's so many things to talk about in terms of the little details that are needed for defending those pushes. I think I talked about everything important. So let's just finish up the show. I'll add any annotations if there's anything I missed. Thanks for hanging out, guys. I'll be back tomorrow at the same time with ICYFAR. Tomorrow we're going to be casting some games with some worker massacres. So yeah, I appreciate you guys hanging out. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course, punch a cactus to the moon. I'll catch you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.